The secret no one knew. Varian thought they knew Keanu Reeves. The world saw the quiet man in black suits, the calm smile, the gentle voice that carried no trace of pride despite the fame that surrounded him. People called him humble, kind, even mysterious. But what they didn't know was that behind that calm face, behind the quiet eyes, there lived a man who loved deeply, quietly, endlessly, and never needed the world to see it. Alexandra Grant knew it though. She saw through the silence. She saw the man behind the actor, the human behind the legend. She once said, "Keanu doesn't speak love in words, he speaks it in actions." And that truth was something only a few ever understood. Their love wasn't the kind that screamed for attention. It was a love written in small, invisible moments, like when he waited outside her studio every night just to walk her home, or when he left flowers by her doorstep without ever signing his name. But one winter evening changed everything. That night, the world almost discovered his secret. Alexandra was preparing for her new art exhibition in downtown Los Angeles. She had been working for months, painting until her hands ached, sleeping on the floor beside unfinished canvases. The theme was healing through light, a project she hoped would help fund therapy centers for artists struggling with depression. She hadn't noticed how exhausted she had become. Keanu, as usual, kept his support quiet. He visited her studio late at night when no one was around, bringing her tea, fixing broken light bulbs, and sometimes just sitting silently beside her while she painted. He never told her, but he secretly paid the rent for her studio when the owner raised the price. She thought the landlord had simply made a mistake. That night, as the wind howled outside, Alexandra worked alone again. She was finishing her final piece, a painting of a shattered glass window letting sunlight in. Her hands trembled. She could barely keep her brush steady. And then, suddenly, everything went black. The power went out. The building was silent except for the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Alexandra reached for her phone, but the battery was dead. She sighed and sat down on the floor, too tired to move. Tears filled her eyes, not from fear, but from the weight of everything. She whispered to herself, "I can't do this anymore." Just then, she heard footsteps. She froze. The door creaked open slowly, and a familiar voice said softly, "You shouldn't be here alone, Alex." It was Keanu. He stood in the doorway, holding a small lantern, his hair wet from the rain. "You scared me," she said, wiping her tears quickly. He smiled gently. "I tried calling. The lights went out, so I came to check." He placed the lantern on the floor, and the warm glow filled the room. He looked around and saw her unfinished painting, broken glass, fractured light. He could tell what it meant. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "It looks like pain learning how to breathe again." She looked down. "I don't even know if it's worth showing anymore. I think people will find it too sad." He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Sadness isn't weakness," he said. "Sometimes it's the only way light finds a way in." For a while, they sat in silence. Rain hit the windows harder now, and thunder rumbled in the distance. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small paper bag. "I brought you something." She smiled faintly. "You didn't have to." He shrugged. "I wanted to." Inside the bag was a small notebook, the kind she used for sketching. When she opened it, she froze. Each page had a tiny note written in his handwriting, short, quiet lines that said things like, "You're enough, don't give up. Your art saves lives even when you can't see it. The world needs your light." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were soft, grateful tears. "You wrote these," she whispered. He nodded. "One for each day you doubt yourself." She looked at him, speechless. "Why do you always believe in me so much?" He smiled, his eyes gentle. "Because you believed in me first, before the fame, before the noise. You saw the man, not the mask." The thunder rolled again, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. "You shouldn't be out here in the rain, Keanu." He chuckled softly. "I'd rather be in the rain with you than dry anywhere else." They stayed like that for a long time. Two quiet souls finding warmth in a dark, cold night. What Alexandra didn't know was that this was only the beginning. In the coming weeks, the world would discover the small, secret gestures that Keanu had been doing for years, and the truth would melt millions of hearts. Asterisk the letters. He never meant for the world to fin the morning after that storm. Alexandra woke up to sunlight spilling through her studio windows. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a clean, gentle silence. She looked around and saw the lantern Keanu had left beside her paintings. On top of it lay the small notebook he had given her the night before, the one filled with his quiet words of faith. She smiled softly, tracing her fingers over the cover. No one had ever spoken to her heart that way. Not with noise, not with grand gestures, but with gentleness. Keanu's kind of love was silent. It didn't shout, it whispered. It didn't demand to be seen, it simply existed. But the world had a way of turning silence into headlines. 2 days later, while Alexandra was setting up for her art exhibition, a young journalist walked into her studio. She said she was writing an article about the event and wanted to take photos of her workspace. Alexandra agreed, not knowing what would happen next. The journalist noticed the small notebook sitting near the paintings and casually asked, "Is this part of the collection?" "No," Alexandra said quickly. "That's personal." She placed it aside, not realizing the reporter had already seen the handwriting on one open page. "You're enough." That single glimpse was enough to start a storm. Within a week, photos of the notebook appeared online. Someone had leaked them. No one knew how. Captions read, "Secret love letters from Keanu Reeves to Alexandra Grant." News outlets exploded with speculation. Fans dissected every page, every word, every gesture. The internet turned something sacred into gossip. Alexandra was furious. She locked herself in her apartment, overwhelmed by the noise. She didn't want to call Keanu, afraid he'd think she had betrayed his trust. But when her phone finally rang, it was him. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Alex, I saw the news." She closed her eyes. "Keanu, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean, I know," he said softly. "You don't need to explain. They twisted it," she said, her voice breaking. "They made something pure sound like publicity." He paused for a moment. "Let them talk," he whispered. "Truth doesn't need defending. But it's your privacy, Keanu. Your kindness. They've taken that and turned it into a story they can sell. Kindness isn't something to hide. Alex, maybe the world needs to see that quiet love still exists. The kind that doesn't use fame to breathe." His words melted her anger. Even in chaos, he was peace itself. The exhibition opened 3 days later, and despite everything, people showed up in crowds. But something unexpected happened. Instead of asking about the paintings, everyone asked about the notebook. Did he really write those words? Is it true he helped pay for your studio? Is your art about him? Alexandra tried to stay polite, but each question felt like a dagger. They weren't seeing her art anymore. They were seeing her as his story. After the show ended, she went outside to breathe. The city lights blurred through her tears. She stood near a small cafe, unnoticed, until she heard a familiar voice behind her. "You forgot this," Keanu said, handing her a scarf she had left inside. She turned around, eyes red. "You shouldn't be here. People are everywhere." He smiled faintly. "Let them take pictures. I'm not ashamed of caring about you. But it's your reputation," she said. "They'll twist everything you say." "Then let them," he replied. "You can't stop people from misunderstanding what they've never felt." She looked up at him. "How do you stay so calm when the world tries to tear you apart?" He took a deep breath, his gaze steady. "Because I stopped trying to fight the world. I started trying to heal it, one small act at a time." She felt tears well again. But this time they weren't from sadness. "You know, your words are like tiny lights," she said quietly. "They make people believe again." He smiled softly. "That's what your paintings do, too." As they stood there under the soft glow of the street lamp, neither spoke again. Their silence said enough. But somewhere in the crowd, a photographer took a picture, Keanu holding Alexandra's scarf, both of them smiling under the night light. By morning, it would be everywhere. The world would soon call it the picture that melted hearts. But behind that picture was something no one saw, to people who were about to face the hardest test of their love yet. When the world began to whisper next morning, the internet woke up to what everyone was calling the most romantic picture of the year. Keanu Reeves standing under a streetlight, holding Alexandra Grant's scarf as she smiled up at him. The photo spread across every platform within hours. People called it poetic, real, even magical. Millions shared it with captions like "True love still exists." But with admiration came something darker. For every kind word, there were 100 cruel ones. Tabloids created stories about secret weddings, hidden affairs, and contracts. Gossip sites twisted their silence into mystery. Alexandra's inbox filled with messages, some supportive, others hateful. At first, she tried to ignore it. She told herself it would fade. But fame, even borrowed fame, never fades quietly. A week later, she was invited to a television interview meant to promote her art foundation. Halfway through, the host smiled and asked, "So Alexandra, tell us about Keanu. Are the rumors true? Are you two secretly engaged?" She froze. The lights felt too bright, the cameras too close. She forced a smile. "I'm here to talk about the foundation, not my personal life." The host chuckled. "Oh, come on, the world just wants to know if this fairy tale is real." She looked straight into the lens and said softly, "The real story is about love. But not the kind you sell on screens. It's about kindness, the quiet kind." Later that night, that clip went viral. People debated her words, some praising her grace, others mocking her calm. And while the noise grew louder, Keanu stayed silent. But silence has weight. One evening, Alexandra found him sitting on a bench near her studio. He looked tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep but from carrying too much. "They won't stop," she said quietly, sitting beside him. "No," he said, "but they'll forget eventually, and until then." She asked. He looked at her with soft eyes. "We live, we create, we keep doing good. The world can talk, but it can't touch that." She wanted to believe him, but the truth was, the world had already started touching everything. Her art sales dropped. Sponsors pulled out, afraid of drama. Some people said she was using his fame. Others said he was being manipulated. The kindness of strangers turned into suspicion overnight. One day, while Keanu was away filming, Alexandra walked into her studio and found a letter slid under the door. There was no name, just a short message written in black ink. "You don't deserve him. Stay away." She stared at it for a long time before tearing it in half. But the words stayed in her mind all night. When Keanu called her later that evening, she tried to sound normal. "How's the movie going?" "Long days," he said gently. "But I miss the quiet nights with you." She smiled weakly. "Me too." He paused, sensing something off. "What happened, Alex?" "Nothing," she lied softly. "Just tired." But he could always hear what she didn't say. "Don't let them make you doubt what's real," he whispered. "The world breaks people who love gently. But we can't stop being gentle." She closed her eyes, tears forming. "Sometimes I wish we could disappear, Keanu. Just live somewhere no one knows us. Maybe one day," he said. "But for now, we keep walking through the noise, together." A few days later, Keanu came back from filming without warning. He walked straight into her studio, carrying a small box. "Close your eyes," he said. She did. He opened the box and placed something cold and delicate around her neck. A simple silver pendant in the shape of a circle, engraved with tiny words. "The noise fades. Love stays." She touched it gently. "You made this," he nodded. "I found a local craftsman. It's not about the price. It's about the reminder." Her voice trembled. "You always know how to make me believe again." He smiled softly. "And you always remind me why it's worth believing." For a brief moment, the world outside disappeared. It was just them, quiet, steady, real. But as the evening went on, Keanu received a call from his agent. When he answered, his face darkened. Alexandra watched, worried. He hung up and sighed. "They want me to make a statement." "About what?" she asked. "About us," he said quietly. "The studio thinks this. Attention is a distraction. They want me to deny it." She froze. "Deny me?" He looked at her helplessly. "It's not what I want, but they're threatening to pull out of my next project." Alexandra felt her chest tighten. "So what are you going to do?" He took her hand. "I don't know yet, but I promise whatever I say, I'll find a way to tell the truth, even if the world doesn't hear it." She nodded, trying to stay strong. But as he left that night, her heart whispered the question she couldn't say out loud. How long can love survive when the world refuses to let it breathe? Asterisk the silence that hurt the most following week felt like walking through a storm. With no umbrella, Alexandra could feel it in every headline, every whisper, every message online. People were waiting for Keanu's response. They didn't care about her art, her work, or her truth. They wanted confirmation or denial. They wanted drama. When the day finally came, she sat in her small apartment, staring at the TV screen. Keanu was on a press tour for his new film. Cameras flashed, interviewers smiled too brightly, and then the question came, "Keanu?" The reporter asked, "People can't stop talking about you and Alexandra Grant. Are you two really together?" For a moment, he smiled softly, that familiar gentle smile that always carried kindness. But then, after a pause, he said quietly, "Alexandra is a wonderful artist and an incredible friend. I respect her deeply." And that was it. The room went cold. Alexandra's heart dropped into her stomach. She knew what he meant. She knew he was protecting her from the chaos. But to the world, it sounded like denial. Within minutes, the internet exploded. "Friend, just friends?" Hashtags spread. Videos replayed that one line over and over. Commentators said she had imagined the romance, that she had used him for attention. She tried to stay calm, reminding herself of his words, that he'd find a way to tell the truth, even if the world didn't hear it. But still, hearing him call her just a friend hurt more than she expected. That night, she didn't answer his calls. She couldn't. The next morning, her phone buzzed again. It was him. Finally, she picked up. "Alex, please talk to me," he said gently. Her voice was quiet. "You didn't lie, but you didn't tell the truth either." He sighed. "If I'd said more, they would have destroyed you. They already tried to ruin your name once. I couldn't let that happen again. But what about us?" She whispered. "They made me look like a fool." "You're not a fool," he said, his tone full of emotion. "You're the only real thing in my life. But the world doesn't let real things survive unless we protect them." She closed her eyes, trying not to cry. "So we hide. For now," he said. "Until it's safe to be honest." She hung up without replying. Not out of anger, but because her heart needed silence. Days passed. She buried herself in painting, in trying to forget the noise, in trying to forgive him for something she knew wasn't betrayal, just survival. But even in her silence, Keanu didn't give up. He started sending her small notes again, left at her studio door, slipped into her mail. Each one carried the same quiet strength that once healed her before. Love doesn't vanish when it hides. Truth doesn't stop being truth when no one believes it. "When this storm passes, I'll be standing right where you left me." Each note was unsigned, but she knew every word was his. Meanwhile, the world continued to guess and gossip. Some fans defended them, others mocked them. But in the middle of all that noise, a journalist found something unexpected. A handwritten letter from Keanu to Alexandra, auctioned by mistake at a charity event. It wasn't meant for the public. It was a love letter, written years ago, filled with words no one had ever heard him say before. He wrote about finding peace in her silence, about how her kindness made him believe in goodness again. The letter ended with, "You are not the noise in my life, Alex. You are the quiet after it." When the story broke, the internet changed overnight. Instead of gossip, people began sharing quotes from the letter. The quiet after it trended for days. They called it the most beautiful confession ever written. Alexandra read the letter online, tears running down her face. She had forgotten he even wrote it. Back then, he had sent it but asked her never to show anyone. Now the world had seen it, and strangely, instead of destroying them, it softened everything. A few days later, Keanu arrived at her studio without calling first. She looked at him, her eyes swollen from tears, and whispered, "Why didn't you tell me you wrote that letter?" He smiled faintly. "Because love should stay between two people." But maybe it escaped, because the world needed to remember what it looks like. She shook her head, half crying, half laughing. "You really think words can fix all this?" He stepped closer. Not words, actions. From his pocket, he took out an envelope. Inside was a folded document, a donation form for a children's art therapy center, fully funded under Alexandra's name. She looked at him in shock. You did this. We did this," he said softly. "For the kids, for the artists who still believe in healing, for everything that matters more than gossip. Her heart finally broke open. She threw her arms around him, holding him tight, whispering, "You always find a way to speak without saying it." He smiled against her hair. "And you always find a way to turn pain into art." That night, they sat together painting under the dim light of her studio. No cameras, no reporters, no world, just them and for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't hurt anymore. It healed. But the world wasn't done yet, because the next morning, something unexpected happened. An open letter appeared online from someone close to Keanu, revealing a secret that could change everything once again. Asterisk, the open letter that changed everything. The next morning began with sunlight filtering through the curtains of Alexandra's studio. For a few beautiful hours, everything was quiet. The world outside seemed to have calmed. Keanu was making coffee, his presence peaceful as always, while Alexandra added a few strokes to her newest painting, a pair of hands reaching for light. It felt like healing. But peace rarely lasts when the world thinks it owns your story. By noon, her phone started buzzing non-stop. Messages, notifications, and missed calls filled the screen. Keanu's publicist called first, her voice tense. "Keanu, you need to see this. Now." He took the phone and opened a news article. The headline made his heart stop. "Open letter from Keanu Reeves' friend reveals truth about his secret love life." Alexandra's hands froze on her paintbrush. What did they do now? She asked softly. He didn't answer. He just clicked the article. It was a long, emotional letter written by an old friend from Keanu's inner circle. The writer claimed to have witnessed everything. How Keanu had loved Alexandra for years. How he had quietly donated money under her name. And how he wrote her hundreds of letters that no one ever knew about. But the part that shocked everyone came near the end. Keanu was ready to give up his acting career for her. The studio knew it, and that's why they made him stay silent. The article exploded across the internet. Fans were divided. Some praised his loyalty and called it the purest love in Hollywood. Others questioned if the story was real. And some accused Alexandra again, saying she had become a distraction. By evening, paparazzi were camped outside her studio, shouting questions. "Alexandra, did he really plan to quit for you? Keanu, are you leaving Hollywood? Is this your goodbye to fame?" Keanu kept his head down, shielding Alexandra as they pushed through the cameras. Inside, she collapsed into a chair, shaking. "Keanu, tell me it's not true. Tell me you're not leaving everything because of me." He knelt in front of her, his voice calm. "I would leave it all in a second if it meant protecting you. But it's your life," she said, tears falling. "Your purpose, your passion." He smiled softly. "You're wrong, Alex. Acting isn't my purpose. Being human is. And loving you. That's the most human thing I've ever done." She covered her face, sobbing quietly. "You can't lose everything because of me." He reached for her hand. "Then help me make sure it's not for nothing." She looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "We stop running. No more silence. No more hiding. We speak, together. One interview, one truth. Let them see who we really are, not who they imagine." She hesitated. "You really think the world will listen?" "Maybe not all of it," he said, smiling faintly. "But even if one person remembers that love doesn't need to be loud to be real, it's worth it." The next morning, they sat together in a small studio for a live interview. No flashing lights, no stage dancers, just two people ready to tell the truth. The interviewer started softly. "The world has seen photos, stories, and even leaked letters, but no one has heard from you directly. What's real?" Keanu glanced at Alexandra, then said, "What's real is kindness. What's real is choosing someone every day even when the world makes it hard." Alexandra isn't a rumor. She's the reason I remember who I am when everything else gets too loud. Alexandra's eyes glistened. "And what's real for me," she added, "is that love isn't measured by attention. It's measured by peace." Keanu brings peace wherever he goes, even in the middle of chaos. The interviewer smiled, visibly moved. "So, are you saying this is love?" Keanu chuckled quietly. "It always was. We just didn't need to prove it until now." After that interview, something unexpected happened. Instead of another wave of gossip, there was silence. The kind of silence that felt like understanding. People began sharing messages of hope. Artists, fans, strangers all spoke about quiet love, private kindness, unseen compassion. But with truth came consequences. Later that week, Keanu's agent called with a final warning. The studio's furious. They're threatening to cut your next contract. Keanu simply replied, "Then let them. I've done enough pretending on screen. I don't need to pretend off it too." That night, he sat with Alexandra by the ocean. The waves crashed gently, the moon reflecting off the water. He took her hand and said, "They can take my fame, but they can't touch what's real." She looked at him, her eyes full of love and fear. "What if you regret this one day?" He smiled softly. "I'll regret nothing that comes from love." The wind brushed past them as if carrying his words into the world. A quiet promise that some things are more valuable than success. But just when everything seemed to finally find peace, a new message appeared on Alexandra's phone the next morning. An invitation to an award ceremony in Paris where Keanu would be honored for his lifetime of work. The letter said, "Bring the person who taught you what love really means." She looked up at him, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "They're calling you back." He smiled, holding her close. Maybe not to act, maybe to remind them that love is the greatest story ever told. What neither of them knew was that the moment they stepped on that stage together in Paris, something unforgettable would happen, something that would make the entire world fall silent once again. Asterisk the moment the world fell silent again the night before the Paris ceremony. Keanu and Alexandra sat by their hotel window, watching the Eiffel Tower glitter in the distance. The city glowed like a painting, calm, timeless, and filled with stories that never needed to be explained. Keanu held her hand, his thumb brushing lightly against her skin. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Alexandra asked softly. "After everything, the noise, the headlines, the lies." He looked out at the city lights, his voice gentle. "This time, it's not about defending us. It's about showing the world that love isn't a weakness. It's strength." She smiled faintly. "You always find the right words." He shook his head. "You gave them to me." The next evening, the Paris hall was filled with the world's biggest stars. Cameras flashed, lights glimmered, and an orchestra played softly in the background. Keanu's name echoed through the crowd as he was called to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award. He stood, took Alexandra's hand, and together they walked to the stage. The crowd gasped. It was the first time they had appeared together publicly since everything had happened. Whispers rippled across the room like wind through trees. When Keanu reached the microphone, he looked at the trophy in his hand, then at Alexandra beside him. "People often say I live a quiet life," he began softly, his voice steady. "But silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's the place where the loudest truths live." He paused. The crowd listened closely. "A long time ago, I met someone who taught me what love really means. Not the kind you see in movies, not the kind that trends online, the kind that stays, the kind that gives instead of takes." He turned toward Alexandra, his eyes full of warmth. "She taught me that love doesn't need to be loud to be real. And tonight, if there's anything I've learned from her, it's that kindness, patience, and quiet strength can change the world." The room went completely still. He took a deep breath and continued, "I've played heroes on screen, but off screen, she's the real one. She never wanted attention. She never wanted credit. She just wanted to create light where there was darkness. And I am proud, deeply proud, to walk beside her." Alexandra's eyes filled with tears as the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. The applause was thunderous, but somehow soft at the same time, like the world clapping for something pure. He turned back to the microphone one last time and said quietly, "So if anyone ever asks what love looks like, it looks like patience, it looks like forgiveness, and it looks like holding someone's hand through every storm and saying, 'I'm not leaving.'" Then he placed the trophy gently on the stage floor and reached for Alexandra's hand again. She stepped closer, whispering, "You didn't have to say all that." He smiled. "I did, because truth deserves to be heard at least once, not by the world, but by the person who gave it meaning." As they walked off stage, flashes filled the room. But for once, neither of them cared. It wasn't fame anymore. It was freedom. Later that night, back in their hotel, Alexandra looked out at the Paris skyline and said softly, "You know what people will say now, right?" Keanu smiled, pouring her a cup of tea. "They'll say what they always say, and then they'll move on. But what will stay is this." She leaned into him, her voice barely a whisper. "You really would have given up everything for me?" He kissed her forehead gently. "No," he said. "I gave up everything for us. There's a difference." The next morning, the world woke up to the most watched clip of the year. Keanu's speech, his quiet confession, and the look of love that silenced millions. News outlets called it the moment that melted hearts. And yet, away from all that noise, in a small art studio back home, Alexandra finished her newest painting, to figures holding hands under falling rain, surrounded by broken light that somehow looked whole again. She titled it "Love Stays." Beneath it, in small letters, she wrote his words, "The noise fades. Love stays." It was the only painting she refused to sell. She hung it above her workspace, where every visitor would stop and stare. Some cried, some smiled, all left a little quieter, and somewhere far from the noise. Keanu and Alexandra kept living the life they had fought so hard to protect, a life built not on fame or fortune, but on small, secret gestures that spoke louder than the world ever could. Because in the end, love didn't need to be shouted. It just needed to be lived.